You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, my guest is someone who, like many of my guests, has come from corporate experience herself. She's become an entrepreneur. She owns a successful restaurant in the Jacksonville area that we'll talk about, and also now runs an advisory and consulting firm helping business leaders with creating their culture of accountability and growth. So her name is Sara Frasca. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, give us a quick flyover of your journey to get to where you are right now. Just kind of highlight the stops on the road there real quick.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Just like everyone, it's kind of a meandering path, so it's unusual. But I grew up in Minnesota, and so after college, I ended up at General Mills, and I was there for quite a while, and then moved to Michigan about halfway through my General Mills experience, and I went to work for kind of an entrepreneurial startup. Then I went back to General Mills, and the importance here is that, the first stint, the first 9 years or so, I was just kind of, yes, I will do everything the way that they tell me to do it. And I was kind of green and, big processes and systems and all the things. So when I was a part of the entrepreneurial spot, I learned a little bit about the entrepreneurial world and having a little bit more kind of startup grit, kind of, tenacity and innovation. And so when I went back to General Mills, I was a different type of leader then. I was, now someone who was willing to challenge the status quo, hopefully done in an appropriate and humble fashion, but kind of asking questions like, wait a minute, why do we do it this way? Could we try it like this? And so I was able to, I think, bring about some change and some good evolution for the businesses that I was serving. So that's my General Mills kind of corporate. After that, I opened a restaurant, and the restaurant is called Frasca and Company Eatery. It's in Ponte Vedra Beach, which is in the Jacksonville area. I'm actually a third generation to serve my grandparents' food. So it is a labor of love. It is, kind of one of those legacy things that, many of us do. I grew up in the restaurant business with, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, all owning and operating restaurants. So, yeah, it's been really fun. But again, it's kind of a difficult, it's very rewarding in some capacities, but it's also, I would say, it's a tricky business. And then I started a consulting firm. And so you talked a little bit about that. I built it with a business partner, and we advise businesses, I would say, kind of in the area of kind of 5 to 50 million in annual revenue. And generally it's businesses like law firms, architectural firms, orthodontists that are artisans of their craft, but they didn't necessarily have the background of how to scale and grow a business, or how to do a partnership agreement to kind of bring on new partners or have partners go into retirement. It could be leveraging data to help them to navigate and make good decisions. It could be, kind of managing a team. And definitely, you mentioned the accountability part, having a system where we can hold the team accountable for what they say. If they say, I will do this, how do we hold them accountable? So yeah, that is a long-winded way of giving you my path. But
well, to your original point, like many, you come out of school, you go to work, and you're not quite sure what your journey is going to look like. And then through a series of, hopefully, what you might consider opportunities, you zig and zag and you land where you maybe were more intended to be. I'm curious. I'm going to ask the big question. I have several friends in the restaurant game, and how in the world do you find time with running a restaurant and trying to have a second business in parallel?
Yeah. Well, I opened the restaurant and ran it from, open to close for 3 solid years. And so, my kind of not only to get it off the ground, but to teach the team, to set the culture, to build the processes. And actually, I always knew that I could run it as a business, not as a restaurant, and employ some of the same things that other businesses, kind of bring to life in order to make it successful and sustainable and those sorts of things. And so I then left the restaurant in the hands of a general manager and really, kind of stepped back, restarted my career, I would say. Thank goodness I had that experience. I would say, it to me, there's no person in corporate America that ever understands what the urgency is of staring bankruptcy in the face or of trying to make payroll. And so when you have that experience, I think you are changed forever. And, I have had great luck. I have had great support with the community. I have never, gone bankrupt. I've never not made payroll, but I have had to grapple with things throughout my journey as an entrepreneur. And again, I think it has made me a better business leader. And it's one of those kind of defining components that, again, I think is a blessing and a curse, the yin and the yang of being in the restaurant industry. So
I totally agree, and as many of my listeners know, I too have had that. I've had 5 different businesses I've established, and you're right. When you come out of corporate, you just don't understand the burden of being responsible for that payroll every Friday or 2 weeks, whatever your cycle may be, and learning quickly how to manage cash flow, even though that might be a concept you never heard of until you get into the business. But it's a whole different ball game. On that note, I'm interested in going back to your second round at General Mills, where you talked about having had that entrepreneurial baptism, going back into corporate a little bit. I hear corporate leaders frequently saying, I wish we could get back to our entrepreneurial spirit, our entrepreneurial mojo, if you will.
yeah,
And inevitably, as companies scale, the enterprise becomes a true entity unto itself. And sometimes it eats its young, and other times it, just continues to morph and grow into the blob. And people feel frustrated trying to steer the battleship. They see an opportunity and they can't turn the corner fast enough to get there. So, what were some of your discussions? You mentioned gracefully trying to challenge the status quo, but can you give us a couple of other examples of,
sure.
I mean, without breaking confidentiality,
Yeah,
but
yeah, no problem. Yeah, and that was again one of the components of um building my coaching. Now I had the capacity and the experience to help small businesses scale and grow to be big, but I also had the ability to take big businesses and help teach them how to have that startup grit, help them have that entrepreneurial spirit because it is still there, believe it or not. I mean, a lot of times, it's probably not going to be the founder. It's um a new set of people that have to believe that what they do impacts the future of the brand. It's funny at General Mills a long time ago, they had a slogan that was um, our brand, your legacy, or our brands, your legacy. And so I loved that because it was like, yeah, you might be, a person that has come in to run one of our brands, but you're the boss of the brand and it's your legacy that you're leaving as you mold, what this brand looks like to consumers and how it is and that sort of thing. So I think if the organization believes that the power is given to the people that are running the business and actually can kind of give up the reins a little bit, I think that the people will have the type of, again, energy kind of drive to help motivate and bring new things. And that could be anything from, communicating within the team to handling client or consumer questions. It could be the actual branding with the logo or the, sponsorship or whoever they're, partnering with. So I do believe that big businesses can kind of give up a little bit of power, which can be a very positive thing because it can modernize and activate and really kind of bring some life to the business. One of the other things is just kind of in my innovation coaching that I've done with some big businesses is really taking them through some of the exercises of let's break down the process. Well, okay, one of the actual one of the big automotive companies that I worked with a couple years ago, we took their 73-step innovation process down to about 12 steps. And so, as you can imagine, it was so deflating for someone to have to go through the 73-step process. Like, oh, you've got an idea? Great. Now you've got all this red tape. And so it was kind of, do we really have to have that step or can it be, morphed down? What's the risk in having 12 steps versus 73? Well, anyway, point is, I think it is possible for big businesses to really kind of think a little differently, be a little more nimble, give a little bit more power to the folks that are running their operations and marketing and that sort of thing in order to enable growth. And if they don't, the cautionary tale is out there with Kodak and Rand McNally and, all the other businesses that have seen their demise. So.
Well, even at smaller businesses, I've talked about this occasionally in my banking days. I was always troubled by the entrepreneurial startup that got scale, got some growth, but then sort of hit an invisible wall. And as demand continued to increase for whatever good or service they were doing, the company would ultimately start to creak and shake and then crash. Yeah. And I, as a young banker, I didn't understand what was going on. And I really got curious and started studying it more. And inevitably, it was always what one of my guests called founderitis. Mm-hmm. The founder couldn't let go or wouldn't let go enough to allow the expansion, possibly literally look and feel a little bit like corporate by adding another layer of management that could be delegated authority to operate at scale. Mm-hmm. And it was sad to me that owners would frequently choose that path as opposed to giving it up and letting go, even to the point of maybe bringing on a partner because, 70% of something really large is still bigger than 100% of not so much.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I have a gentleman who's a part of Point Northeast with me, and he often says, the founder has a certain skill set. There's a certain type of energy they bring, and, they've got a lot of drive and they've got a lot of passion, and, but they're not always the right person to get it to the next level. And so I happen to be the founder type. So, I am like guns a-blazing with a new idea and you can't stop me. I'm like a bulldozer and a dog with a bone. But then at some point I need someone to come in and help me. And, luckily I've got him to come in and help me take our Point Northeast business, up and to the right, as we call it, because he's got the skills to take it to, and so we're kind of doing that. We're doing exactly what you just described. I do think it's a different skill set. And as a founder, as an owner, you've got to have the humility to say, like, what got us here is not necessarily what's going to get us there.
Right. Yeah, and having that foresight and willingness to say, I truly am trying to build a functioning asset that's bigger than me. And, if you can do more of adopting that, and sometimes owners I talk to, I try to talk to them in terms of what would it look like if you stopped being the operator and started being the investor in this business?
Yep, that's a good point.
would you change the way you evaluate sometimes daily decisions? Would you be willing to let other people get involved? And those that kind of really take that to heart and go, wow, I've never thought about it that way. And it's like, and then you ask the real question of the founder, what's your end game?
Right.
Do you have an end game?
That's great. I'm loving both of those questions. I think, there's a lot of kind of when someone is working inside of the business and they're just kind of managing and building, they're not looking at the big picture. And so we oftentimes will say, got to spend some time working on the business, not just in the business. Um, and I think, again, if you have a leadership team, if you have trusted people around you, sometimes I'll set it up as you're an advisory board. Think of yourselves as an advisory board on the business, not the HR leader and the marketing leader and because that's in the business again. And so how do you see the bigger picture in order to make decisions to move the business forward? And there is a separation of my role is this, my ego is this. I don't want to give up my budget. I don't want to give up and so people have to have that kind of letting go of their ego, seeing the bigger picture for the good of the business. So, and the second question that you asked is a funny one because I often say it's never too soon, just like it's never too soon to think about a 401k or think about saving for your retirement. It's never too soon to think about your succession plan. If you're going to give the business to an employee, a beloved employee or a child or a, family member or something, great. That type of path sets you on the course to do different things than you might if you were trying to sell it to private equity or to, someone who might want to acquire the business. And those sorts of kind of, decision points, even if there's options until the very end, they're still helping you to set the kind of path forward. I think people oftentimes are forced into a decision at the end of their career. They haven't, kind of had the foresight to look ahead 10 years out and say, you know what, I would like to sell the business. Or if I don't choose to sell the business, at least get yourself set up to sell the business, which means it's in a better place than if you hadn't thought
Right.
that
Right.
through. So,
Well, and an integral part of that question is the again back to the founder. It's like if you can't step away from 30 days without the business crumbling, what do you really have? You
yeah.
don't have a saleable business. I've got a good friend who was a doctor of veterinary medicine. He had a thriving practice, but he did not have partners. He did not have an ecosystem. And when he decided it was time to retire, he said, I'll just sell this. I have this huge book of customers. Well, guess what? When you left, they left.
Hmm.
And anybody that is in the game of buying those kind of businesses knows that.
Yeah.
And so he fundamentally got nothing. He
Yeah.
sold the equipment as spare parts, and that was about it.
Hmm.
That was all the liquidity that was there.
And that's the reality of a professional service business. I think, sometimes we counsel our clients, is it a lifestyle business you're growing? And if it is, great. There's nothing
Right.
wrong with that. You will have a lovely life. You'll make the money you need, but it's likely not to have a future after you're gone. If you're building a company, that can be sellable because it is not reliant on one individual or even the people that are in the business. It's a system. It has systems and processes, and there's probably repeatable income revenue that's coming in. That's clients are set up. There's some stickiness to the business, and so again, it just depends on what people want. If they want one or the other, that helps to figure out what the path is.
Right. Right. No, very much true. Well, let's shift gears a minute. We teased the topic of accountability. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
So, how do you, in the modern world, a lot has been discussed and written about all the generational differences in the workplace and how leaders struggle with creating accountability, even at its most basic. And by and large, accountability as a topic has a negative spin. If you say that word to an audience and ask for a show of hands who thinks it's positive, who thinks it's negative, the majority is going to say negative. So, how do you tackle that?
Oh, well, I think accountability is a fantastic topic. I love it. And I would say, in my opinion, I think people who are driven and want to be, a contributor, they want to be measured. I mean, it's like, it's the people who are avoiding detection and they're trying to kind of hide in the shadows of the business. Those people do not want to be accountable. Those people do not want to be measured. So, I love accountability, and I think it is a very useful component of kind of keeping people and the business on track. And so when um, I'll just kind of tell you that most of the time I have in my early career been a part of strategic planning sessions, and it's like a kumbaya, it's like, oh, we're so excited for the future and nothing happens after it. And it's so deflating and so frustrating to have this wonderful conversation that nothing comes from it. And so it becomes a little bit of, all right, we've got to build a waterfall. If this is where we're headed, what is the smaller term? So maybe it's a 5-year vision. We break it down to 3. And so if we're going to achieve the 5-year vision, we've got to build that 3-year midterm. And if that 3-year vision is going to happen, we've got to have this as the 1 year. Well, now we've got a shorter term and we can start to chunk it out into quarters. And now that we know what we need to achieve in each quarter, now we set the metrics for each of the people that are driving towards that quarter. And so it might be, all right, the marketing person has to do this, and the operations person this, and the finance person this, and on down the line of all the different functions within the business. And so if all of them are doing what they say they will do, if they've said, I will do this for the business, now we got to measure them. And the beauty of measuring them means that we have a scorecard that is the good and bad cop of the system. Now, me as the supervisor of the people, looking at their scorecard with them, I get to be a coach. I get to say, gosh, you didn't quite hit your numbers this quarter. What do we need to do for next quarter to help you hit your numbers? And hopefully there's some sort of an incentive tied to those, because that's how we can, provide a carrot. And so, it's the scorecard again, that very black and white. Did you reach the numbers and the target, or did you not? And it's very, very objective, not subjective. And again, as the leader or as this person's manager, I am now in a position to help them achieve what they've said that they would like to do for the business. So it doesn't matter the function. I think everyone should have at least one number that they are counted on to accomplish.
It's really interesting you say it that way. I'm harking back to my early days in banking. When I got out of the military, I went to work for a large regional bank who I didn't know much about banking. I was new, but they liked my military leadership, so they wanted me. And I went to work there, and I was quickly introduced to all of the systems, and I call it the religion that we had there, and it was all around budget and planning. And at the heart of the budget and planning was a target. You talk about the 5-year big picture. Our leaders told us if we can achieve 15% earnings growth year over year. Now, 15 is a big number for a lot of businesses, but here's the deal. If we can do that consecutively for 5 years, when you do the math on that, 15% earnings growth over 5 years, you will double your business in 5 years. You'll double the size of the company, the reach of the company, everything's double. And at the time, again, I thought, okay, like you did, whatever. Okay, yes, we'll do that. But to your other point, then, so that was broken down into the annual budget, and there was a very rigorous process to establish that. But every cost center had its share of that objective. And we had a scorecard that came out every month that showed how your cost center was doing against that big picture target. And it was either black or white. If it was black if you were under budget and underperforming toward the number, or it was white if you were on or greater than. And of course, our leadership reminded us we are a sum of our parts, and if every part pulls its weight, we're going to get there. We'll achieve that goal. So there was an accountability, and what I observed that was really interesting in that environment was, at first it felt painful if you were a manager and you had to go through the budget process. I mean, their stories were legend of people getting fried in the hot seat, over their budget, and I was part of that process in as an administrator of it in my early career as an analyst. And then when I moved on into management, I was in the hot seat, many times. What I observed, number one, is not everybody endured that. And to your point, and I totally agree with what you said, people who are driven and want to achieve, they want to be measured. So those people came into that ecosystem and thrived. It was like, oh, game on. We have a target. We have a goal. Let's do this. And as we started racking up quarter over quarter earnings growth, all of a sudden we saw this string emerge. And then there was a flywheel of effect that kicked in. And it was like, oh, dang, we don't want to break this chain. We're on a roll here. Well, we ran off 64 consecutive quarters of earnings growth, 16 years of earnings growth. And we had oil busts and real estate busts, and markets weren't stable and weren't great through that 16-year run, but the way we managed it kept us on track and kept us doing what we committed we wanted to do. And the business thrived, and we were one of the only regional independents that survived two big financial crashes. And a lot of our competition was crashing and burning and being gobbled up and other things. But it proved to me the discipline of setting that bar, setting the system in for measurement and accountability.
Yes, yes. And I would say if you have people that don't want to be measured, I would say that's a pretty good signal. The performers who are, very incented to bring, their talents, they want to be measured. So,
yeah,
that's good. I love that example that you've shared.
So back to the restaurant real quick. What's next for it?
Well, I think perhaps more locations in the Jacksonville area. I think we have been in operation for almost 11 years now. I'm trying to think back. It's going to be 11 years in the spring. So, I really do think that, bringing it to other parts of Jacksonville, which is a very large kind of metro area, will be the next evolution. And then we'll see from there. I'm cautiously optimistic with it. I've never wanted it to be the type of restaurant where it makes a ton of money. That's not my scheme. It is great quality food, which means we have really high costing ingredients. We make everything from scratch. So that in and of itself is more expensive. And then we always have a high level of service. So that means that, again, we have a higher labor cost than most. So when you put those two factors in, high quality food, high quality service, you've got a, smaller margin, and I'm okay with that. I'm very proud of the food and the service, and I do not want to sacrifice either of those things for personal gain. So it's a kind of a slow building business, but again, that's been just fine with me. So,
So how did you guys do through the lockdown with the COVID? I'm sure
yeah,
that was painful.
it was. I mean, I would say we had to change our business plan almost every day. I mean, it was constantly evolving, and we had some innovations that were pretty fun. I actually have told this story, but I think and again, I'll be bold here. I think we were better coming out of COVID than we were going in. I mean, I really and truly, I believe the team came together, the types of innovations and creative problem solving, at its core, people could not come to us, so we had to go to them. And,
Right, right.
we found a way. So,
Good,
yeah.
good. Well, congratulations and
Thank you.
kudos on that. Well, Sara, I think we're about up on time today. Tell folks the best way to get a hold of you. Oh, and mention your two books. We didn't touch on those yet.
Yeah. Well, the first book that Michael Smith, my business partner, and I wrote is right behind me here. It's called Up and to the Right. And the premise is really how to steer your business on the journey of success. And so when you think about Up and to the Right, it's basically small incremental steps like climbing a mountain, right? It's not all at once, but better revenue, better profit, better retention of your key employees. How do you do that? And so we've got the steps to do that. The second book, I've got my test copy. You're the first one to see it, really. So you can see it's a test copy here. The intentional journey is a little bit more holistic, but it's about how to build a strategic plan, not just for your business, but also for all the areas of your life, so that as a leader, as a business leader, you can arrive to your business as the best possible version of yourself. You can then support the next tier, who then hopefully has, better support and can be the best form of themselves, supporting the next level down and all the way down through the organization. So our hope is that this book can create some ripple effects from the top down in a business, helping people be, again, just more fulfilled, better versions of themselves, able to show up lit up from the inside out.
I love it. And intentionality is one of my magic words that I talk to my clients about. You're right. It is so vitally important that we establish that good intention with everything we're doing, not just business, but with life itself.
Yeah.
So, Sara, thank you so much. How to get a hold of you.
Oh, sorry,
Best
I
way.
forgot that part. Honestly, pointnortheast.com is the easiest. And all of my contact information, including, emails and how to reach myself and others is on there. So pointnortheast.com or simply pointne.com.
Okay,
Pointnortheast.com.
great. All right, Sara, thank you.
Having
Well,
me.
as always, folks, we're going to have those links and the references on the books in the show notes. So check that out when you get a chance. And I do like to remind you, we've got a video version of this show over on YouTube at same name channel, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Check out our archives. By the time Sara goes live, we're going to be at about 450 or somewhere in that range of episodes and chapters to look at. So we'd love to have you on board and share it with your friends. Pass it around. Let us know if there's anything we can do for you to help you. But for now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.